There is a place, a National Historic Landmark right here in Pittsburgh, that I always tell people to visit when they're looking for less conventional recommendations. The Cary blast furnaces are kind of hard to describe. They are huge and imposing and rusty, but there's still so much humanity literally riveted into the place. And it's one of the last pieces we have that really shows our city's history as a steel-making giant. And when you go, you are not just going to stand there. You can take their industrial tour and learn all about iron making, the workers who helped build America, and the culture that developed around them. Or you can learn about graffiti and art, taste whiskey, or hear about how these manufacturing centers were impacted by the Great Migration. I really can't recommend these tours enough. Learn more at riversofsteel.com/tours. Jens, there is so much going on in the world right now. And sometimes I just need to be a pure Pisces and let the magic of it all take over for a minute. That's why I am excited to check out Meant to Be. It's this new show at Liberty Magic downtown with the magician and entertainer Hennick. He specializes in offering personalized mysteries. If you haven't been to Liberty Magic yet, get on it. It's this incredible speakeasy theater located on the very same block where Houdini once performed for Pittsburgh near the turn of the century. It's like a perfect setting for a mystery show. Get your tickets at trustarts.org/magic before they disappear.
Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, Kamala Harris made her pick for VP, and it's not our governor. A Pittsburgh-based company just got lots of money to launch driverless trucks in Texas, and Netflix's Unsolved Mysteries reboot is turning its attention to a local cold case. It's August 9th, the Friday News Roundup. I'm Mallory Falk, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. I'm with CityCast Sophia Lowe. Hey, Sophia.
Hey, Mallory.
And we're joined this week by a special friend of the pod, the editor of Pennsylvania Capital Star, Kim Lyons. Welcome, Kim.
Ooh. Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be with you.
Excited to have you here. Obviously, the very big Pennsylvania news this week is our governor, Josh Shapiro, will not be on the presidential ticket this November. Kamala Harris chose Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. Kim, were you surprised at all by this news? Who was your money on for VP pick?
You know, honestly, at the beginning of all this, which is a whole, 2 whole weeks ago that this started to unfold.
Wild.
It feels like it's been 2 years, right? But so at the beginning, it really seemed like Shapiro was the front runner. You know, he kind of had the resume. He was, practicing what seemed like a stump speech in some of these, he goes to like sort of ribbon cutting community events. Like he does a lot of those, and there's cameras there. Were a lot more reporters over the past couple of weeks whenever he did an event. Mm-hmm. But I think near the end of last week, it started to feel like things had shifted a little bit and that Walz might actually be the front runner. He sort of was auditioning as well. He went on cable news interviews, and he was the one who kind of pointed the Democrats into this idea that the Republican candidates are weird. Like that was him.
Yeah.
That sort of coined that, and that they really have run with that. So I think at the beginning of this, it really seemed like Shapiro was the front runner. But I think, near the end of last week, it was feeling like it maybe had shifted away, and he wasn't quite as strong of a lock as he maybe had been in the early days of the Veep stakes. But yeah, I think overall, a lot of people were surprised because he did seem like a strong candidate, just given that he is leader of a swing state that's super important. I think that argument, though, I was sort of puzzled by, like, oh, well, he'll help you win Pennsylvania. But, is that to say that now that he's not the pick, that he's not going to help them win Pennsylvania? Like, certainly he was going to do that all along, right?
It seems like even the reception that he got at the rally in Philly, he wasn't the choice, but seems to already kind of be trying to rally Pennsylvanians for the Harris-Walz ticket.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think the day that Vice President Harris introduced Tim Walz as her running mate in Philadelphia, it was a huge, huge rally. The Liacouras Center in Temple was it was completely full. They had an overflow room. So it was a lot of focus, a lot of excitement.
Yeah.
But I really think Shapiro gave the best speech of the night there. He was, in his top form as an orator. There's a lot of comparisons between him and Barack Obama, right? And their speaking styles. He was very passionate, spoke very specifically in support of Harris and Walz. He got a huge standing ovation. I think the hometown crowd was really showing its support for him. And, everyone knew the situation at that point, that he had not gotten the vice president role. But I don't think you could have asked for anything more. I mean, someone compared it to it's like you invite your ex over to meet the new guy that you're dating, and that's
I would not do that. Bold.
Terrible analogy, right? But he really, I think, rose to the occasion. I mean, whether you like him or not, or agree with him or not, it was not a fun position for him to be in, right? He's here in his hometown arena, right? Before a hometown crowd, and everyone knows he didn't get the job he wanted. So,
Kim, I'm kind of surprised to say that Shapiro's was the strongest speech in your opinion. Maybe it's just my personal feed. I was seeing mostly Walz. I know all the momentum's also around him, and everyone was like, he made a couch joke. He called out JD Vance. So, I mean, I've very carefully curated my feed to memes. But what about Shapiro really stood out to you in that moment? Besides, the way he was speaking, was there anything policy wise or anything he was saying about this particular election he was going to do?
I think he, just the fact that he was speaking this passionately about a ticket that, he wanted to be part of, but he still was going to back this ticket. I think it shows, one, within the Democratic Party, obviously everyone kind of quickly closed ranks behind Kamala Harris when it was clear that Biden dropped out. And so I think he really was trying to solidify that. And I think he spoke at the end of his speech, he spoke about how he had leaned on his faith, and it was very important to him because there was a lot of conversation after Kamala Harris made her pick that, this was anti-Semitism because Shapiro was Jewish. He has really tried to dispel that, pretty definitively. And I think that was an intentional move by him to make sure that was, he really specifically addressed that, his faith was important. And, I think it was a way of him acknowledging that conversation, but he's really shut that down since that it was a factor at all. Again, you can like the guy, not like the guy, but you have to, he's an impressive orator, and he really can get a crowd going when he hits the right pitch, I think.
So he was clearly able to, kind of summon whatever he needed to get out there and be a good cheerleader for this ticket. Do we have any sense of kind of privately how he's taking this, how he's doing? I was struck by, the statement he released. He said he still has a lot of work left to do in Pennsylvania. And it almost made it sound sort of like it was this mutual decision for him to finish out his term as governor.
The mutual breakup.
And stay here. The mutual breakup, exactly.
Yeah.
Conscious uncoupling.
Yeah. Or I'm going to withdraw from consideration before I get dumped. Is that kind of, but I think, we don't have a good sense of how he's doing personally. He spoke a little bit yesterday about how, he doesn't, get too excited when people have good things to say about him, and nor does he get too worried about when people have bad things to say about him. He's trying to portray this, image of someone who, hey, disappointed, but yet there's bigger picture things here. And I think, there's been a lot of stories about what happened behind the scenes and how he, quote unquote, lost the vice presidency. I mean, one, he didn't have it. It's not like he lost something he had and then it got taken away from him. It was sort of this opportunity, right? So, and there's been a lot of speculation about, how Kamala Harris made the decision. She based it kind of on who she felt chemistry with. She seemed to feel a little bit more affinity to Walz. And, there's been a lot of reporting. And again, this isn't my reporting, but just, a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, which take that with a grain of salt, right? But that he, that his interview when he sat down with her didn't go as well as he had hoped, as both sides had hoped. And then at some point between that interview last Sunday and on Tuesday when she made the announcement, he made some kind of outreach to the campaign. So, there's lots I still want to do in Pennsylvania. So I don't know if he'll ever, maybe when he writes his memoir, years from now.
Which we know is going to be coming at some point.
No question. And I think, he's going to speak at the DNC, the Democratic National Convention in 2 weeks' time. I'm going to be really interested to see what he says there, how it closely resembles what he said in Philadelphia, or if it's going to be more forward-looking. There's a lot of debate also about, did this help his standing within the party? Does it tarnish him? I think it showed more people of his potential. Look, he's only been governor for a year and a half. Even though he ended up not getting the job, I think it raises his profile. And there also has been a lot of speculation about, if Kamala Harris wins, would there be a position for him in the cabinet? That I think is very speculative, but
I guess I could see it.
Yeah, I mean, I could see maybe a role like attorney general or a cabinet secretary position. Transportation is one that springs to mind because he's been such a, got I-95 fixed in 12 days. It was a refrain that we heard constantly for a while there, right? So I think ultimately, even though the end result was not what he wanted, I think ultimately this whole process helps Josh Shapiro's profile nationally and kind of burnishes his reputation as, a team player who, even though he's not the vice president, he's definitely going to go to bat. And I think when he's in your camp, he's pretty explicit and speaks about it really well and really delivers the message in a very strong and positive way.
Yeah, and I wonder if Shapiro really wanted to be VP. I know obviously he was in the running for this long, but some of the reporting I've read from, the people who are in the know behind the scenes is he was asking a lot of questions about what the VP role entailed. Right. And I know everyone keeps joking about he's going to run for president one day. You can see it now. So I mean once you're VP, obviously you could become president next, but right. I just wonder if the VP position would have given him that face time he wanted. Because I feel after this race is over, we're not going to see too much of Walz unless, something drastically changes. But we didn't see too much of Harris during Biden's presidency.
You're absolutely right, because I think, a lot of people were saying that about Shapiro as a very strong executive. You go from being kind of the boss to being not the boss in a really significant way. You're very high profile, but you're not very much involved in necessarily the decision making day to day. And I think, that was one of the things when this whole thing started was people were kind of is he really going to be able to content with vice president? And, if you want to think that through a little further, if Kamala Harris doesn't win, then what would that do for his political fortunes then? I mean, is he tarnished to the point where the party wouldn't want him to run again in 2028? And if Kamala Harris wins and he's the vice president, is he going to challenge his president to run in 2020? He would need to wait another 4 years, right? Potentially, if she sought a second term.
That's another TV drama. I like coming up with plot lines.
Yep. So there are a lot of, all things considered, I think this has worked out okay for everybody. I think Josh Shapiro is probably feeling a little disappointed, but ultimately, I think this helps him in the long term, and his standing in the party is really solid right now. And I think I'll be really interested to see how Shapiro is deployed across Pennsylvania as they continue campaigning here. I mean, we're still the battleground. That hasn't changed. So how visible he's going to be will be interesting to watch, and kind of how he conveys the campaign's messaging.
Yeah. And then J.D. Vance also had a rally in Philly. The first picture I saw of him, I thought he accidentally showed up to Kamala Harris's rally because he had his Kamala Chaos banner, but everyone was standing in front of Chaos. So all I saw was Kamala and J.D. Vance.
And he had been at an event. I want to say it was in Wisconsin. It was one of the other swing states earlier in the week. And everyone behind him had signs that said, "You're fired." They said, "Kamala, you're fired," but you couldn't really read the Kamala. So it was just like people waving signs behind him saying, "You're fired." So
it's very strange graphic design, but were there any takeaways besides, maybe he needs new graphic designers from his visit in Philly? I know it's his first stop in Pennsylvania since he got announced as Trump's running mate.
Yeah, I think he is sticking to the script, attacking Harris, attacking Walz. I think they need to figure out better venues for him. I think I don't know if he does the big arena rallies as well as Trump does. I think, when they first announced Vance, they were talking about they were going to park him in Pennsylvania. And this was his first visit, and they go to Philly. Really, if they're going to try and, appeal to Pennsylvanians, I would think they'd come out this way, right? That's where they think, because he's, from a neighboring Rust Belt state, we're going to immediately fall right in love with him. But I'm actually surprised it took this long for him to show up in Pennsylvania. And I think he is not the strongest, speaker. I mean, I think having him in the same cities, which is what it looks like the Trump campaign is doing, right? They're putting him in the same cities over the next few days as the Harris-Walz campaign. I don't know if having that comparison is really super helpful for him, but I think he got across the message that the Trump campaign wants, which is, Harris-Walz is bad. They're bad for the southern border. They're bad for all the reasons that, Republicans say Democrats are bad. But I think he still is kind of proving himself. I don't know that he had some families who had been affected by fentanyl use. And, that is something that I would think they'd want him to lean into more, that's sort of his origin story, right? With his book, Hillbilly Elegy, right? And that, he's been personally affected by fentanyl abuse in his family. And I think that to me seems like the most effective way to use him, but far be it for me to give advice to presidential campaigns. But I think, the more they lean into that, the more it seems sympathetic, because right now he's trying to shake the weird label, right? And I don't know that he's quite gotten there. I mean, fairly or unfairly, that's what's following him around right now. And I think he needs to do a little bit more of that sort of human touch kind of thing. That seemed to be the most effective part of the appearance that he did. But I think, the campaign would be wise to, I think, do more of that, to humanize him a little bit more, make him seem more like a relatable person, because right now I think he's not quite there.
How long until you think Vance, Trump, Harris, Walz, they show up in Pittsburgh? We talked on the show last week about how Biden launched his campaign in Pittsburgh, and we're kind of used to maybe getting these visits. So
Mallory is. I'm from New Jersey. I'm not from a swing state. I'm still getting used to political ads.
Yeah. Well, let me just tell you, it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better in the next couple weeks. But yes, I actually wrote an editorial a while back before Trump came to Butler, actually, saying you got to come out west. You can't just stay in Philly. Like, look, if you live in Delaware and you work in DC, certainly Philly is much more convenient, right, for Biden. But there's really no excuse for Vance, Trump, Harris, Walz to not spend significant time in Western Pennsylvania, especially Vance, if they're going to try to appeal to, kind of working class white voters in the Rust Belt. Certainly that fits the description of Pittsburgh much more closely than Philadelphia, right? So that's why I thought it was weird that his first stop in Pennsylvania was Philly and not Pittsburgh. But yeah, they got to show up here. They got to spend some time here. I suspect we'll see Trump out here pretty soon. Again, he's talked about wanting to do another event in Butler. Whether that comes to fruition, who knows? But I really think, we saw Kamala Harris out in Western PA a few times this year before she was at the top of the ticket. I think more of that needs to happen, certainly. I think, there's a lot of progressive voters in Western PA who are a little bit skeptical, of the Biden ticket for sure. They're still, I think, maybe undecided or unconvinced by the Harris-Walz ticket. So I think they really need to spend some time out here. They really need to get out in Western Pennsylvania, get in Pittsburgh, get in Erie. These are areas that neither campaign can afford to lose. And they're not really putting in the time here. And I think, time's running short. They got to show up.
Hey, Yins, one of my favorite parties of the entire year, Arbor Aid, is coming up so soon. It's Tree Pittsburgh's annual fundraiser, and it has got everything. Local cider, live music, a squirrel mascot, and they are known for homemade pierogi and an unparalleled cookie table. Plus, last year, they had these forest-themed boozy giveaways. It was amazing. 10 out of 10, no notes. If you want to hang with us by the Allegheny River in Lawrenceville and support an amazing cause, get your tickets now. It's Saturday, September 14th, and just know everything you give helps increase our tree canopy here and ensures our neighbors have access to trees and all of the amazing benefits that they provide. So come party with me. And pro tip, bring an instrument this year. I'm not kidding. Visit treepittsburgh.org to get your tickets today.
Okay, so moving on to some local news, a Pittsburgh company just got a lot of money for driverless trucks. We've talked about this on the show a little bit before. Aurora Innovation is a self-driving truck company that's headquartered here in Pittsburgh in the Strip District, and they just raised $483 million to fund the first phase of their driverless trucking service. Kim, Sophia, first thoughts, how do you feel about driverless vehicles in general, driverless trucks in particular? A fan? Are you terrified? What are the feelings?
I think it's scary enough to be next to a truck on the highway, and to think that there's no driver behind the wheel of the truck is scarier. I am not a huge fan of the idea of a driverless vehicle, to be honest, just from a standpoint of safety and concern about, if you're going to have a mix of drivers and driverless on the road, that feels like it's not going to work out great.
So I am a bad driver, so a driverless car for me is like maybe something that would be kind of nice potentially. I've hit a lot of things. I've hit my friend's garage. I've hit a mailbox, trash
Sophia,
cans.
warn me when you're going to be on the road, and I'll stay off.
I don't drive. Everyone knows that. You're okay. I don't think I've gotten to the best thing I've hit, though. I have hit a New Jersey government vehicle. I have a clean driving record. It was from their department, I think, of Treasury, and they didn't respond to the insurance call. So clean record, stay away from me anyway. So the fact that I wouldn't have to drive, but I'd be able to get around, may be appealing. Probably public transit is still better for me because I get lost. But anyway, driverless trucks, though, scare me so much because they are huge. Why can something that big be on the highway that someone is not actually manually controlling? Who decided that? I'll fight them.
I don't know. I get it. Like I get why it would be practical to have driverless trucks because you think about, truck drivers drive long routes and they get tired and they have to pull over. It's not super efficient to have a human doing it. But like, you get into a wreck with a truck, driverless or not, that's not going to end well for the driver of a car. Right? I drive a little Kia Soul. My car is not going to survive a collision with a truck of any kind. So I just feel like there's a lot of safety precautions that still are not super clear. I'm a very big fan of letting other drivers know how I feel about them cutting me off, or like thank you for letting me merge in front of you. And I don't know. I feel like you kind of lose something when there's no driver.
Yeah, our driverless cars going to know about the Pittsburgh left?
Well,
this is a critical question. But they won't actually have to learn for a minute because I guess the big piece to this story is that these autonomous trucks, they will not be on the road in the Pittsburgh area anytime soon. They will be launching in Texas first. So Pittsburgh was, for a minute at least, a real testing ground for driverless cars. And it seems like Texas is taking that mantle when it comes to self-driving semis. A couple companies are launching autonomous trucks there, including Aurora, which plans to start a route on I-95 between Houston and Dallas by the end of the year.
Because the roads are big enough for the trucks in Texas.
Yeah, and there's a lot more open road, right? Like it's not like downtown Pittsburgh, the Strip District, where you can't, you can't really maneuver a truck. So it makes sense. There's a lot of wide open space in Texas, but still, I don't know.
Yeah, and Texas also has the legal framework to do this. They passed legislation back in 2017 that allows for self-driving vehicles to be on the road without a human operator. What's interesting, though, is Pennsylvania passed similar legislation a couple years ago. It went into effect in January 2023. But this was right around the same time that it seemed like the AV industry, the autonomous vehicle industry here, was in a bit of decline. It was right when Argo AI shut down, for example. It does seem like some of the companies that are still standing are shifting away from cars and focusing more on commercial trucking. Like, I think it just seems more feasible right now to use this technology, like you said, Kim, on big open roads instead of complicated city streets. I saw reporting from Pittsburgh Business Times that Aurora initially asked for $350 million to launch this first phase in Texas. They said they only had enough money to get through the end of next year, but obviously they ended up raising much more than that, almost $500 million, from selling additional shares. So it sounds like this was a win for them.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot of money, and it definitely is, going to help them sort of make these vehicles more hopefully safer and hopefully to help develop them. But yeah, that is it was surprising to me the amount of money, to be honest, and because like you say, they were kind of concerned about running out of cash not too long ago. So but you raise another good point that Pennsylvania kind of passed a law allowing autonomous vehicles right around the time some of the autonomous vehicle companies were either backing out of the business or sort of scaling back. So it's interesting to me that Texas has now become kind of the home of driverless vehicles. I know there's other states that are considering it as well, but I just think it's going to be one of those things where if you're going to only have driverless trucks legal in some states, how's that going to work? Like you can't do interstate commerce that way. What's the point of that, right? So I think this is one of those things where the laws still are catching up with the technology, which often happens, right? Technology is sort of far ahead of things, but driverless trucks are probably the first frontier of driverless vehicles. That this is the use case for them is pretty obvious, right? More so than maybe driverless cars.
Yeah, I asked, my father-in-law actually was a truck driver for about 10 years. So I asked him, what he thinks about driverless trucks. And, this is obviously a sample size of one, but he thinks, if you are going to automate a vehicle, trucks make the most sense. And if you're going to automate an industry, truck driving really makes the most sense, for a number of reasons, including you can put a lot more sensors on a big truck where there's just more room and you're not having to worry about aesthetics. And then, he said he and most of his friends who drove trucks, did not think it was a good way to earn a living. Most of them were pretty miserable and found something else to do. And he thinks we're going to look back and think it's wild that humans were driving trucks, especially with, the way that the delivery system works now. There are these pressures put on people to make deliveries in timeframes that are completely unrealistic. And so when you're thinking about the safety factor, I too, a truck with no one behind the wheel makes me incredibly nervous. But then you have to look at the factor of, in the the truck driving industry. There are people driving on no sleep, a lot of people relying on uppers to be able to try to make these deliveries in time frames that aren't humanly possible.
Right.
And so there is an argument to be made for this actually being a safer form of delivering goods than having an actual human behind the wheel. But obviously it's still, Texas is now this testing ground and it's in the really early stages. And I imagine a lot of people who aren't in Texas are glad that this is getting tested on those highways and not their own.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see, how the safety testing goes and how Aurora, kind of moves forward with us. Like, what are the things that need to be fine tuned before we see these in other states, and like what are the lessons that Texas is going to have, right, for other states as they're thinking about legislation for this? Because if they're going to use these trucks for interstate commerce, the states are going to have to come up with with rules and regulations. I mean, you can't have a truck that can't go through certain states. So that doesn't make it, the whole point of it is to make it more efficient, right? So if you don't have laws that have caught up, that's going to be another potential obstacle. So it seems like one of those things where, now is the time for states to be thinking about it, how they're going to allow it, how they're going to regulate it.
Or are we getting federal guidelines around all of this at some point?
Are we getting federal guidance? Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So I think that's another part of the conversation that, these trucks can't really go very far if they can't move among different states.
And, we were talking about how at one point Pittsburgh was a testing ground for a lot of these autonomous vehicle companies. Kim, I know you were following this during former Mayor Bill Peduto's administration. How have you seen Pittsburgh's approach change over time? Like, is there any difference between how much Peduto prioritized this versus our current mayor, Ed Gainey?
Yeah, well, I remember when Uber first moved into Pittsburgh, and I think at one point the Uber CEO called Peduto Uber's favorite mayor, something along those lines. That he really looked at it as a way of, the taxi service was not great at the time. It was definitely a industry ripe for disruption, especially in Pittsburgh, and so he really kind of welcomed Uber in with open arms. And then I think when there was, Uber was moving into this idea of driverless cars. I think Peduto saw it as an opportunity for, we have robotics technology is, a huge industry here. And it seemed like a fit for what the potential future of technology in Pittsburgh was headed. I don't know that the Gainey administration has prioritized it as much. I think Peduto was someone who kind of pushed it maybe before it was quite ready. Obviously, Uber is not the player in autonomous driving that they were at that time. So I think it's interesting that, that conversation has sort of faded a little bit about Pittsburgh being sort of the testing ground. I remember everyone sort of trying to drive around the strip district and see the driverless car. It still had a driver in it, but it had kind of the sensors on it and everything. And everyone was trying to find Uber's driverless car for a while there. But I think, I think it was a big push by Peduto that I think is not as big of a priority for the Gainey administration, certainly.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like at the same time Gainey became mayor, some of these companies were realizing, maybe they couldn't quite get this done on the timeline they imagined or at all, and were shutting down or changing course, no pun intended. So that could also be why they're not getting as much attention right now.
Yeah. Well, speaking of attention, a nearly decade-old Western Pennsylvania cold case is getting the spotlight back on it. So it's part of this Netflix reboot of Unsolved Mysteries. I have not seen this show. I don't know if either of you have, especially you, Mallory. You're kind of, I think, a little more into this based on your love of Lifetime movies.
No.
Is that the same thing? I don't watch a ton of this.
But see, Lifetime movies are fictional. I think it's okay to watch these wild stories of someone who the contractor they hired to build their dream home, who they thought was sexy, is actually murderous. Like, I can take joy in that because none of those people are real and none of that exists. Real cases, it feels different. It feels kind of icky. Yeah. Although I get that Unsolved Mysteries, the point is to try to get new attention and actually try to get some movement on these cold cases.
Help the crime be solved. Yeah, and I think I agree. It's sort of was the precursor to a lot of these true crime podcasts, right, that try to solve mysteries and try and solve murders. And, I remember the original iteration of the show, and it was really kind of probably inappropriate for me to be watching as a child. It seems like it maybe wasn't the best show, but like, I'm interested that they're rebooting it. Like this case, I sort of vaguely remember, the case that they're focusing on about this poor woman who they found, if I remember correctly, right, was her head.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So for anyone who's not familiar with this case, it happened in Beaver County, an economy borough. An eighth grader was walking home from school and stumbled on a severed head near the woods. It was embalmed, so almost perfectly preserved. Investigators say it belonged to a woman who was likely somewhere in her 60s to 80s, and nobody ever came forward to claim her. So to this day, we don't know who she is or what happened to her.
But there's some like theories about where the head came from, right? Like, did they have anything to go off of when they were looking for the woman? Or was it just sort of like, we're going to put photos out there and see if anyone can give us any answers?
Well, I think the weirdest part was that she had been embalmed. Like that was so they were trying to figure out, was it like something from
a funeral
home or
thing,
something?
right?
But yeah, no one. Was it something that had been donated for research? And no one could like sort of piece that together. Like those were the things that they, they were trying to figure out at the time. But there was no nothing came of that. So it seems like a weird one that no one ever came forward. You would think if it was a funeral home, they would notice that the head was missing, right? So it was a very weird case. It was very, one of those things that, without a lot of forensic evidence, there wasn't a whole lot they could figure out at the time. So it's an interesting one for them to focus on. And it's interesting to Unsolved Mysteries to be rebooted as specifically as it is by Netflix. It doesn't feel like a bingey kind of show, and if Netflix is kind of they drop all their episodes at once and you binge it. But I don't know that you want to binge a whole bunch of unsolved murders. It doesn't feel like it would be the most entertaining. I don't know. But I think this is really a case that, a lot of people would like to see solved. So hopefully it leads to something good. But I don't know. I'm a little wary of any true crime, but specifically a TV show that you could potentially binge. I don't know.
Well, so Beaver County crime solvers, they're certainly hoping this leads to something good, and the exposure on Unsolved Mysteries will help them finally solve the case almost a decade later. They're offering a $5,000 reward for information that helps solve the case. But Kim, it sounds like you're a little skeptical.
Well, I feel like in that moment when she was the head was discovered would have been when the most clues were available. I feel like this is a pretty cold case, and if at the time, if they weren't even it was a pretty clearly had been treated, the body had been treated in some way, so that the fact that no one came forward at the time, I don't know. If it was a prank or something, maybe people wanted to keep quiet, but if it was an accident and wasn't meant to be there, I feel like maybe this person comes forward now, years later. I don't know. I would like to think so. I think it's a case that probably deserves some explanation, but I'm a little skeptical that after all this time it's going to be productive, but I guess we'll see. Stranger things have happened.
Well, if you feel compelled to learn about this cold case or revisit it, this episode of Unsolved Mysteries, the full season is streaming now on Netflix, so you can check it out. And if this does lead somewhere and the case gets solved, we will definitely update you. That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. Our music is by Benji. Sophia Lowe, Selena C.A. Reynolds, and I produce this week's shows. Francesca DeBecco is back, our beloved newsletter editor. We're so excited she's back with the team. She, our regular host Megan Harris, Natalia Aldana, and Lane Fisher all wrote the Hey Pittsburgh newsletter this week. And I'm the team's executive producer, Mallory Falk. We'll be back on Monday with more news from around the city. Have a great weekend.
We can say getting shit done. We're not bound by FCC rules.
I wasn't sure.